book here. As I promised, we're on the second video. Happened right after the first video. If you want to, be sure about that, well, just look at the clothes here on the side of the bed. It's still in the exact same spot. So, as promised, we're going to dive right into our first issue, prophecy, specifically the Antichrist. Um, if you aren't familiar, I encourage you get one of these or pause the video, go online to Bible.com, and you can search the Bible. Just click start reading and follow along with any verses that I've got here. So obviously we're going to start. With Revelation. I know I said we wouldn't, but it very nicely sums up exactly what it is that we're going to be looking into, and then we're going to get into the verses that I believe have the specifics, if you will. Of course, these things, as it says in Revelation, they take understanding. And if you don't have understanding, of course you're not going to know. But if you do have the understanding, then you would know. And that's what I'm going to give you guys. A little bit of understanding so you can take for yourselves whether or not you believe it, whether or not you do or don't, really doesn't matter. Because it's prophecy, here's the thing. And it's ironic because, the Bible says this too. When it comes to prophecy, if the prophecy comes true, then you know it was from God. If it doesn't, then it wasn't. And that means one very interesting thing. Prophecy is not ambiguous. Prophecy is dead on. And that means it either happens or it doesn't. Sometimes yeah, just to take exactly that. People may use some ambiguous, things and say, oh, look, that was prophecy. But really, that doesn't mean that they are. So, going into Revelation chapter. Oh, yes. We'll go into chapter 17. This is a very, very awesome chapter. It talks about it's basically from chapter 12 on to about, 20 is imagery. It's prophetic imagery. Whenever you're talking about prophecy, um, major prophets, often when they had prophecy, they were in the images of animals. They had all these things that don't really make sense, like these goats. There were 7 goats here and 3 lambs over there, and these did that. So that is very ambiguous. But the problem is, it's not so that we wouldn't be able to figure it out. It's because they require wisdom. These are things that if people just knew, they would probably panic. And it says here in the Bible also, is the glory of God to conceal a thing, and the glory of man to seek it out. That is to say, if God prides himself in hiding huge truths and subtle details, the only way you're going to know anything that he really wants you to know is if you're actually reading the Bible and seeking to understand these things. Everything that says this requires understanding, how many Christians do you believe would be able to tell you the answers to these things? They'd say, we just can't know these things. All this is subjective. It's relative. Well, you know what? That's a bunch of bull. The fact is, they don't know what the Bible says. They don't know what the God that they've claimed has said about these things. So that's a problem. Me, I believe if it says it, I'm going to figure out whether or not it's true. And so far, I figure everything is true. I haven't found anything yet that contradicts. So here in chapter 17 of Revelations, we see the imagery of, as everyone knows, you don't even have to be a Christian, you've heard this, mystery, Babylon, the mother of harlots and abomination of the earth. So we're looking at the great whore of Babylon. Everyone knows about this. Whether or not you're Christian, they've heard about it. And everyone knows that it represents a people, a city, a continent, whatever. It represents a group of people. And this is where lots of the mainstream prophecy and prophets and soothsayers, seers, whatever you want to call them, where a lot of these people get off on selling information saying, I know the truth. Only I know the truth. No one else who said it before said it right. Um, and they sell information to Christians, people who claim to be Christian, but they don't know what the Bible says. So they buy it up. And they buy it up because they want to know, but they don't want to seek. And Jesus says, seek and you shall find. That doesn't mean seek on Google and you shall find. Because, I mean, there are a lot of situations in the Bible where you really just can't find it on Google. I've gone through it myself. I said, oh, Google knows. I'll search this up and where is it gone? Nobody knows about these things because nobody's looking into it. And then the people who are looking into it haven't posted it. And that's not like a problem on them. That just means the internet is not the go-to for everything. Internet's great for one thing. That's getting the Bible. Because you can get it for free. You can get it in any language. You can get it in audio form. You could download it. I mean, the Bible, everyone knows this, but the Bible is the most pirated book in the world. And, think about that. I mean, people are stealing the Bible. In other countries, of course. It's not happening here. I mean, it does happen, but not as prevalent. People who actually want this information are willing to go to stealing to get it. Now, what does that say? Oh, they're going to hell because they're stealing, right? Wrong. David himself, when he was running from Saul, he had gone into the temple, something that kings do, sure, but he took from the showbread and ate it because he and his men were starving. So they ate from the bread. That's something for the Levites only. Only the Levites were allowed to eat the food in the temple. David ate it. You know what God said? He was hungry. Really? I mean, everyone else who touched it died. They were killed because it's not lawful to do. That says something about law. Law is good, but it's not always right. It's not always the right thing to do. And that you have to understand. So we get back to this cultural narcissism that, Babylon is everyone else but the actual culprit. And I can tell you, this is a shocker. But I will tell you exactly who it is. And I'm not selling information. It's on here free. You look into the Bible. It's there. And I'll give you all the verses you need. And everything, the entire Bible points to this truth. And it'll blow your mind. And regardless of whether or not you believe it, the fact is that when the time comes and the Antichrist shows up, which I believe it'll happen, half the world believes it'll happen. The Jews themselves who hate Jesus believe it'll happen. Not all Jews, of course. But the fact is, when it does happen, you can look back in your mind on the things that I've told you, and if you see them happening, you know exactly what's going to happen next. You know that it was true. And that's all this information is. That's all prophecy is. You look at it and you say, okay, that's good information. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to wait on it. I'm going to watch. I'm going to be ready for it. And if it happens, I'll be ready for it. If it doesn't happen, I don't need to think about it again. It's simple. So, the Whore of Babylon. That's all you needed to know. That's all we're going to look into right there. Then we're going to take it back to Daniel chapter 11. But first, quick history lesson. The Old Testament is long. Let me tell you, it's very daunting the first time you read it through. Second time, once you have the context, let me just say this. If you're going to read the Bible, I hope you do, start with the New Testament, because that's most relevant to you right now. It's the story of Jesus from birth to crucifixion to resurrection and to his prophecy of coming back. That's the basis of everything Christians believe today. And generally, that's probably all they know, if they know even that. Then read the Old Testament, because then you have to go through searching for where anything matches up with what Jesus will say. Because oftentimes he was quoting the Old Testament, even on the cross, where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? People love to jump onto that and say, well, hey, Jesus was forsaken by God. So if he was God and he forsook himself, then why should I believe in God? And that's what they go with. That's really what they go with. But the irony is, he was not saying that for himself. He was saying it because it's prophetic. He's pointing back to Psalms chapter 22. And guess how it starts? My God, why have you forsaken me? Here's what he's saying. That prophecy has been fulfilled right now. That's exactly what he was saying. It's simple, but if you don't know it, you don't know how to answer it. And that's how you answer it. So back to the history lesson. Adam and Eve, good, you got it. Noah, got it. Okay, Moses, Israelites, Egypt, miracles. They're out of Egypt. 40 years in the desert, and Israel's born. Here we are in Israel. Now, Israel has a mean streak of turning their back on God. When they were in the desert, as soon as they got out of Egypt, after all that they saw, 2 weeks later, they built a golden calf and said, "These are the gods that led you out of Egypt." Whoa. I mean, it's crazy, but I mean, if you think about it, that's how humans are, you know? We are hardwired to want to give praise to everything we see. And having experienced greater things, we want to give praise to the greatest things that we experience, right? And if we don't find those things to give praise to, we'll give that praise to something else that doesn't deserve it. That's how it is in any context. So you have the Israelites who experienced greater things than we have seen in these days, and they get out of Egypt by the hand of God. He opened up the Red Sea for them. Let me tell you something about the Red Sea. It would take them 2 days to go through the Red Sea. I know all the popular movies, they like to say, oh, they just hopped on in there, and then 5 minutes later the walls came crashing down. You have, what was it, 400,000 people walking across a sea. Now we're not talking about a pond. And if it was a pond, no one dies when the water comes crashing back down. You know what I mean? It even says so. If you look into the story, it shows the pillar which was with them follow them by day in a cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire. And when they're crossing the sea, you see something happen. At first, the pillar, which is God, the Father, because He hides His glory. That's how you know Him in the Old Testament. Anyone, we'll get to that in another. Anyways, when they start crossing the sea, He changes His position from leading them from the front, saying, "This is where we're going," to being in behind them. Why? Because the Egyptians had chariots. They had horses. These people had feet. They had to hop along through the Red Sea, right? Meanwhile, chariot right here is going. It's pretty easy to catch up to somebody on a chariot. So if you want to go with that argument, then the whole thing falls apart. It couldn't have been the sea. There's no way they're going to make it through in 10 minutes. 400,000 people carrying women and children and their oxes and all their belongings, and they're going to get through in 10 minutes? No. So what was happening there is that God Himself, the Father, because at the very least, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you at least have two entities to work with in the Old Testament: God and the Almighty. Always described in these two ways. And when it talks about God, it talks about the Spirit. When it talks about the Almighty, they're talking about the Father. They don't recognize Him as the Father because He's not the Father yet to the Son. That doesn't mean Jesus wasn't around. That doesn't mean Jesus was just, osmosis, and then here we have another God. That's not how it works. He was there. He just did it in a very different way. And let me tell you something about this also. The people in the Old Testament, whenever they came across angels, whenever they came across God, they didn't know the difference. Why? We haven't seen angels. If an angel showed up to you, you'd be like, "God?" And they'd be like, "Nah, bro, not me." And that's how it works, And there's keys to understanding, to knowing when it is Jesus that you're talking to, when it's the Father, and when it's an angel. And these keys are only found in the Bible if you actually look into it. So back to this pillar, right? We got 3 days. It says it was with them day and night. And even if you look into the details, they were there about 3 days crossing that river, that sea. And it was after the last Israelite stepped over that bank, the walls came crashing down, killing all the Egyptians that followed them. No doubt, many Egyptians. So simple. Go to the Red Sea and dive on in and look at the bottom. Scrape, scrape, scrape. We have maritime archaeology. It's just not done. It's not done there. Why? People are afraid. They're afraid that if you actually look into it, you'll find something. If you seek, you'll find. And it's funny too, because me having a degree in anthropology, which is the study of cultures, living and dead, um, I, I I have an interest in biblical archaeology because the Bible is the oldest religious text that we have from any culture intact. And moreover, the Hebrew culture is the sole surviving ancient culture in the world today. They're older than the Maya, older than the Inca, older than the Aztecs. They're older than if you want to go this far, they're older than Mesopotamia. They claim to be. But what we know for sure is they're at least as old as Mesopotamia. And these people, this culture is alive and intact today, and they are the most hated people in the world. Why is that? Nobody in science field is considering the fact that this is your field. They're the only people alive that can tell you about what they left behind. And biblical archaeology, as I heard from a friend of mine within the archaeology field, he says, you know, biblical archaeology is like the joke of the archaeology field. And I know that. Nobody wants to touch it because of God. Because God is still alive today. And I mean that on multiple levels. Yes, he died and resurrected, but I mean that God who people believed in is still alive. You don't have, Tanakh Titlan, the Tlacoco, all these cultures, mainly mine, because that's what I studied. You don't have the gods that these people worship. You don't have Tlaloc, the googly-eyed, well, you probably don't know. Anyways, you don't have these gods anymore. That's why in archaeology, you look at it and they say, wow, this god is so fascinating. Look how they worshipped him. This is amazing. But he's gone because those people are gone. If the Israelites are gone, would God be gone? No. But here's the thing. They don't know that because God is still around, because the Israelites are still around, and they're the ones who came up with this God. If you want to look at it from the secular perspective, that's how it is. If the culture dies, the God dies, then this culture is still around, this God is still around. That's how it works from the secular perspective. At the very least, Israelites, the Jews, the Hebrew culture is the only remaining archaeological field left that is truly something that can be prosperous. The only culture where we can actually still go to those people and say, what did they mean by this? What do these texts say? What are the nuances? What about this? What is this? And they know because they live in this place wherein they said this is where we were risen up. So let's get back to it, huh? So the Israelites with their mean streak against God. They get out of Egypt 2 weeks later, they're complaining. They get into the desert. This is awesome, right? They get into the desert. It says, not a one of them, their feet never swelled, and their clothes never wore. And they had food. God brought them manna, that bread-like substance that grew from the ground. It wasn't dropped by quails or whatever. It wasn't a bird. It says it was like the communion wafers, something like that, like coriander seed that describes it. And what you do with coriander seed or like wheat, right? You gather it, you pound it up to a flour-based kind of thing. You bake it, you eat it. It's simple. They had bread. For 40 years, they never had to put their hands to a plow. And still, they complained, you know. They complained, I don't know, a few weeks later, they're like, hey, you know what? Egypt had pork. I like pork. I mean, where can we get some of that? Hey, Moses, tell this God guy, food's great, but where's the beef? You know? And so God purposed to destroy them right there and there. Here's the awesome thing about God the Father. He doesn't take crap. Okay? People like to complain about God and say, if God's so righteous, why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he say that? Why doesn't he just destroy me when I say this? God is not a man. He doesn't have to answer to you. And you say, yes, he does. Yes, he does, because look at the stuff that happened to me. That's great. But where's your answer? You're not going to get one unless he feels like giving you one. Because he doesn't have to give you one. In fact, he gets like, boom, heart attack, and you're dead. Why doesn't he do that? Because he doesn't have to. He doesn't care. You can't hurt him with words. You can't hurt him with anything you say. You can hurt his people, sure. That's not going to do anything. You can't force the hand of God. He, who is the master of life and death, can easily bring that person back. You know, in the old days, that was a ridiculous notion to think that people could be resurrected. You know, we look at that and we say, oh, he's dead. No, can't bring him back. These days, people can be dead for minutes at a time, and we can bring them back because of technology. Because of technology. God, who created everything, the means by which you came up with these technologies, he can easily just say, well, shoot, let him live again. And he did in the Old Testament. We think it's crazy, but if we came up with that same thing, how can we say resurrection is crazy? Can we really do that? What makes Jesus' resurrection different from the other resurrections in the Old Testament is Jesus was God, is God. He did it himself. He went down to the grave. He hung out for a while in hell because, we'll get into that in another section. Because he had to get the saints, the people who were dead, before him, before his sacrifice. Because without Jesus, there is no heaven. That means the people who were good in the Old Testament, they only had one place to go because they weren't good enough. They weren't at that standard. So he had to go get those people back, the keys of hell, all that stuff. Again, we'll get into that later. But let's not get too far off topic, huh? So we have a rebellious nation, and they continuously rebel. Once they actually get established in Israel, which was basically the Middle East, all the way down to Egypt, is the whole territory that they were possessing, should have possessed. Half the tribes possess the places that they should have, which is the general area, Egypt, not Egypt, from Lebanon down to Egypt. That's what they possessed in the olden times. The rest of it, they didn't take the people who were there. They didn't push them out of the nations, and so they took over. They lost those places. So Egypt was significantly smaller and became much more so less over time. While they were there, the biggest rebellion says, and I don't have the verse here. I know it says it. You can easily find it. I'll tell you where to find it. I just don't know the specific verse and chapter. Within the book of right before the book of Kings. Actually, I have a Bible right here. I can easily pull that up. Here we have Chronicles. We have Kings before that, and we have Samuel. Samuel is where Paul decided, or not Paul, where the people of Israel, that whole collective nation, decided that they wanted to be like the other nations of the world who have kings. They wanted a king. And God said, you don't need a king. I'm your king. I'm your leader. I put you here. I protect you from all these people around. I do it. I give you food. I am your king. All you have to do is listen to me. I already gave you statutes, which is what you wanted. I already gave you rest. You don't have any enemies that can stand up against you because I'm here with you. And they said, no, we will have a king like the other nations around us. And God himself, in the Old Testament here, in the book of Samuel, there's two of them. Read them both, why not? Actually, the first one, because that's where you'll probably find it. And God himself says, this is the greatest rebellion that you could have, because they chose not to have God involved in their lives. They said, we don't want you. We want a different king over us. And so God went a step further. He gave them a prophecy. He says, listen, people are flawed. This is what's going to happen. If you have a king, he's going to use and abuse you guys. And they were like, well, we want a king. We're not going to hear any more of this crap from you, God. So give us a king and shut up. That's what happened. That's what happened. That's their rebellion, and that's where it all went downhill. A king, a king in Israel. When you hear kings in Israel, you think David, you think Solomon, you think, oh, these kings were great. They're the greatest kings ever. Yeah, they were great guys, and God established those people. But the problem is the kingship, because they took that from God. They, the people, rebelled against God by excluding him from their lives. So here's where we get the problem of the Antichrist, right? So what happens is, over time, they have their multiple kings. Starting with Saul. Saul was fine, and as God said, this guy wasn't the guy that they chose. Wasn't the best guy, and he eventually kind of stabbed them all in the back, and so they had to get a new king. This is where David comes in. David kills Goliath, and he doesn't become king there. He gets favor. The problem is that God already knew that's what's going to happen, so he had Samuel go and anoint David as king for when Saul dies. David didn't go kill Saul so he could become king. He didn't care for that. He just wanted to follow God. And so he grew in favor, and Saul tried to kill him multiple times. Never worked, until eventually Saul drove him out of the city, and he ended up in one of the neighboring countries, and they let him stay there, knowing who he was. The king himself let him stay there. And then one day there was a battle. David actually purposed to go just to show his loyalty to this guy who took him in. And the guy said, "No, he's one of these guys. We can't have him in this fight against these people. But just to be safe, let's not have him go so he can't sabotage us." That battle that David would have been in is the battle where not only Saul died, but his son Jonathan, who had protected David, died. So extremely significant. It's he was protected from that, because if he had to go to this battle and he was against his best friend, would he be able to do it? Would he be able to kill him, knowing that he was a good guy? Probably not. So here's where we have David comes up, then his son Solomon builds the temple, and um, we go on. There's more kings. There are a total of 5 kings. 5 kings. The fifth king, actually the fourth king, completely rebelled against God. He took the temple itself and built altars to other gods in the temple of God, the God who led them to Jerusalem, who allowed them to have a kingship. He built altars and worship unto every god but the God who put him there. And so for that, he took the kingdom, he split the kingdom from his, not his generation, but his son's generation. So the fifth king was the last king over all Israel. And then the nation split. They split into Judah and Israel. Israel is the rest of them. Why? Because God had promised David that there will be somebody on his throne from his lineage forever. So David's line continued to rule over this small place known as Judah. Judah is the Israel that we know today. We call it Israel because that's all that's left. And it's sad, but that's all that's left. Judah. That is Judah. So the rest of them, they split off. Rarely ever, and I mean rarely ever, did they follow God. There was maybe 4 or 5 cases out of the 20 so kings in Israel that ever followed God. Mainly they just continued to pervert themselves and turn further away from him. And in Judah, it rarely happened, but it did happen. About that same ratio where you had a few kings who were just bad, and the rest of them, they more or less followed God, until the final ones, where they too became like Israel and rebelled against God, created idols, etc. And so the problem with that is that's where the captivity came in. This happened twice. First, the Assyrians came and captured Israel, Judah, and pulled them out of the nation. Eventually, that captivity let up. They came back. Israel perverted themselves again, as if they didn't learn, the millions of times before. They keep doing it. And so then Babylon happened, the final captivity, and that's where the Old Testament ends. Is at that captivity. It ends with the words of the prophets, but it really ends in Chronicles or Kings, where it talks about this was the last time Judah had a king, or the last time Israel had a king. The significance for the Antichrist is that in Daniel chapter 11, it talked about what will happen between this. And it talks about the kings of the north and the king of the south. For a long time, I struggled with this. Of course, I just prayed about it and asked God. Eventually, it just clicked, you know? Where the king of the north and the king of the south, at first I thought, okay, Russia and Israel, sure. Or North and South Korea, but these are not the case. This is again, that's that it's that narcissistic view that's saying it can't be what it is. It has to be. It's got to be something big. So I gotta exclude everyone else and just think about the big players in the game, as if I know the players in the game. So the kings of the north and south. Before, Israel had north and south, which would be Judah, the north, and the south, Israel. They were one nation with one king over them at a time. So in this book of Daniel, it talks about the kings of the north and the south coming together. It talks about the things that, the negotiations that they'll encounter. And it talks about the rise of kings, right? So it says that, actually let me just pull it up right here. Let's see, 5, lost chapter 11, here's Daniel, over here. Yep, and this one just many stand up against the king. Turn his face, search for. Okay, so it gives you this. It says 4. Well, there's 8 kings. It tells about 8 kings, and specifically which one will be the Antichrist. 8 kings. The 8th one is the Antichrist. The 8th one, and it doesn't tell you what nation. It doesn't tell you his nationality. It doesn't tell you any of this stuff. Why? Because it's prophecy. Glory of God to conceal a thing, glory of man to seek it out, right? 8 kings, 5 are fallen. One will be, and will continue for a short time, and then the one after him is the Antichrist. This is awesome. Ready? About to blow your minds. So, in Israel, the full nation, they had 5 kings. 5. All of them have fallen. Oh, that was clever. Yeah, 5 fingers, 5 words. All of them have fallen. Fallen being dead. One is. How do you suppose that is? Israel now is a democracy. They don't have a king. If you look at, in terms of like, once they split, Israel had multiple kings. Oh, so it's the second guy after they split. No, it's not, because he's not a king over all Israel. God himself said, the king over Israel will remain in the line of Judah. David is not immortal. He died. So it's obvious they were talking about his throne, his line of succession. David himself says in Psalms, "You've made it so that my line will never cease." So we have to think, this is a king over all of Israel, everyone, the north and the south. And in fact, in Daniel, it says that this is what the negotiations are for. They'll negotiate. Both guys are just in it for themselves. But eventually they'll come up with this plan to stay together by having a king again over Israel. This hasn't happened. Israel hasn't had a king in 2,500 years. 2,500 years. So when I tell you Israel will have a king again, it's ridiculous. It's just flat out ridiculous. If it happened, the chances of that happening, 0. This is an impossibility. For this to happen again, it's an impossibility. So for the Bible to say it's going to happen again, that's how you know it's real prophecy. You see it happen, you know I'm telling the truth. So check it out. We have 5 kings, 5 fallen. One is. Now this is where we get into Judaism and Christianity. Jesus came, when he died, what was that guy's name? Pontius Pilate. He had it put above his grave, under his grave, whatever, on the cross. This is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Extremely significant. And this is why it's not missed anywhere. It's because Jesus was God, and he was born to be king over the Jews. That's why, beginning in Matthew, when you see it, when you read it, you see a genealogy being read off to you. The significance is that Jesus was from the line of David, from his father Jesse. No, not Jesse. Jesse was David's father, Joseph. Joseph was from the line of David, but he was so far removed. They were so far removed from the culture, he didn't even know he was royalty. But it clearly states exactly how Joseph was in the line, and that's what God chose, to keep the line going. He brought back himself into this by making himself king. This is where the son comes in. Not the father, this is where the son comes in. The father's still there, the son comes in, he's doing his own work, right? There we have the son, right there. So check it out. The sixth king of Israel would then be Jesus. What does it say in Daniel? The sixth king is. Not fallen, is. And when you look in the Old Testament, when they say somebody is, it means they're alive. When they say this person is not, they are dead. Dead. Not coming back. Is. This is the Old Testament saying that one person who was around in the past is still around. That's Jesus. Let me tell you, that's... So, you got 5 kings fallen, 1 king is Jesus. That means the 7th and the 8th person is the Antichrist. It's clever because nobody would expect that it'd be the 7th and 8th. That's how God does things. Because it can't be anyone else, they're just humans and they're dead. They're not coming back. That means Israel will have a king again. This king, the 7th king, will reunite Israel. And moreover, it tells you the specifics of what he's going to do. It tells you he's going to negotiate. It tells you the daughter of the king of the south is going to be part of this negotiation. It tells you that he's going to start conquering, again, the nations around Israel that were once part of Israel. He's going to start reclaiming the land. Moreover, he's going to be successful. And that's the key right there. Because Israel's going to have their king again, which they've always wanted. And he's going to actually be doing work. It's going to be legitimate to the point where they're going to say, God has reestablished us. And you know what it says about that, about this king? It says, this king will be established for a generation. That's in Psalms. In Psalms, it says that. And at the end of Psalm chapter 22, all prophecy. And I went and looked into the Dead Sea Scrolls because it just ends too abruptly. Like, the context of it, it just cuts off. It's like, okay, we told you about this, the crucifixion, excellent. And then we're going to start talking about the kings. We're going to start talking about the Antichrist in Psalm 22, the last 2 verses. They start talking about it, and I'm like, whoa, awesome, okay. And then the chapter ends, and I'm like, what? I know what they're talking about, but it didn't finish. Why? The Dead Sea Scrolls for Psalms, the bottom of it, there it is, destroyed. That doesn't mean the information's lost. Obviously, they were talking about it there. You wouldn't catch it if you didn't know anything about the Bible, about prophecy, about the end times. And it's God himself, the Holy Spirit, who brings to remembrance all things concerning himself. So, you gotta believe in Jesus, life, death, and resurrection in order to have the Holy Spirit. Think about it like the perfect memory bank. There was a verse, what was it? Boom, got it. I do that a lot. How much do I read? Well, now I've been reading a lot more. I'm reading through the Bible again. I read it through once. I read it through once 3 years ago. And there was that period of 2 years where people could come up and ask me, in fact, they sought me out to ask me questions about the Bible as if I read it daily. And I knew the answers. But not because I read it multiple times. I only read it through once. I figured, if this is true, if the Bible says it's true, I believe it's true. If the Holy Spirit's the one that brings to remembrance everything, all I have to read it is once. If I've heard it at least once, The Holy Spirit will remind me of that. And that's true. 100% true. And that's why I remember all these minuscule details. It's not because I read it so many times. And you'll hear so many preachers online say, oh, this person, what are his credentials? Well, this man, he has spent 80,000 hours studying the Word of God. People are like, oh, this man knows everything. No, it's God who gives knowledge, God who gives understanding. I know more than a lot of these people, not because I study, because I believe and I understand that it's God. If it was all that it took for you to just invest hours and hours and hours to understand God, what would the use of God be? You don't need God anymore because you can do it yourself. But that's why God hides things, because He will reveal them to the people who are willing to humble themselves to actually learn from Him, not thinking they can do it on their own. That's why I don't spend too much time, dwelling on details. I just read it, and then I'll wake up with an inkling to read something else or to look into something. That's how I ended up with this information about the Antichrist. So let's get back into it. Let me just say that's what you need. Just believe that God can reveal that information to you. And if you want that information to be readily at hand, then you have to believe the truth, which is Jesus is the sixth king, the one who is because he is alive and is God. You believe that? If you can't get baptized, but let me tell you, the people on the cross, the one that didn't get baptized, neither of them got baptized. One of them believes in Jesus, and Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise. Today. He didn't say, hey, bro, you got baptized? Sorry, can't do it. Baptism is a symbolic thing. Jesus himself did it. Why? It's so significant. It's representing the death, going into the grave. When you're in the water, right? And you just get into the water. Obviously, hold your breath, and just sit there just for a second or two and just think about the stillness. That's what death is like. That's what it is. The resurrection, coming back up out of that water. Having been still and dead, coming out of that water. It's possible. It's possible. And that's what that is. That's what that represents. And it's such a, I can't even tell you, it's such a weird scenario to have to go into a church and say, I want to get baptized, because then they're going to want to do all these strange things. And they're going to expect you to start helping out at the coffee bar, or feeding people on Fridays, or sweeping up or whatever. None of that is in the Bible. It's good if you're part of a church. If you just want to get baptized, you should just be able to get baptized. But let me tell you, you can do it yourself. Just fill up your tub, get in there, say, God, I believe this. I believe this. Jesus is alive. He was the king, is the king, died, resurrected, proved he was God. And say, I want this. I want to know. I want to know more. I want to be ready for the end. That's it. And then, like I said, just get in there and just dwell on it for a second. Come back out. There's not going to be any magical feeling. Maybe there will. Maybe there won't. Wasn't for me, But all it is you telling God you believe it and you want more of it. So back to these kings. We got 5 fallen. Jesus, the one, is alive. The next king of Israel is the Antichrist. Israel, again, has not had a king in 2,500 years. They will have a king again. This guy will reign, and he will convince people that he is heaven sent from God. And here's where it gets crazy. He's going to go and start conquering the world. Not the world, the nation of the Middle East. That whole area, everything that used to belong to Israel. He's going to take it back for Israel. The Israelites are going to love him for this. And of course, they're going to say he is God for this. And they're going to expel the Muslims. This is so significant. Let me tell you something very interesting. People question, like, where's the ark? Where's the ark? It's in Ethiopia. It's been hidden. It's been lost. The government has it. It's the American government. They got it in Area 51 somewhere. The Bible tells you where the ark is. It tells you where the ark is. After the second time that Israel was expelled and came back, they found in the temple of God, because it's no small place, they found in the temple, one of the guys, one of the priests, he found a book. Here's kind of how it went. What is this? Law of God. Oh. And he went and told the high priest. He said, listen, I found this book, and it's got laws, and it says if we don't follow these, God is going to completely remove us from this place. They mourned because they knew the truth of it. Their fathers had fallen so far that they didn't even remember they had a law. And what they did was they took the ark and they put it in the house of Solomon. Solomon's house hasn't been found yet. Why? Why has it not been found? They believe that the house of Solomon was built on the Temple Mount. Who currently controls the Temple Mount? It's the place of the ascension of Muhammad, they say. Am I against Islam? Yes. Am I against Muslim people? No. I'm not against people. I'm against false teaching. And I'll get into it in another video, but let me tell you, the story of Islam is the exact same story of Mormonism. Because they're the same story, neither one can be true. That's how it works. Deductive reasoning, call it, Anyways, so the Ark of the Covenant is in the House of Solomon. It's on the Temple Mount. I don't know if the Muslims know that or not, but they are occupying the location of the Ark of the Covenant. And that's why Israelites are not anywhere allowed to be near it. To the point where they would be killed if they were even in the district. In their own nation, no less, which is crazy. So check it out. That's why in Revelations at the end of it says the ark is found in the temple of God. That doesn't mean it appears. It was found in the temple. It's there. It says it's there. It says it in Revelations. It says where they put it in the Old Testament. It's there. Nobody knows? Now you know. Because I know. Because God knows. Because God told me and I told you. Because I felt like it. So check it out. Right? So you know now. Israel will have another king very soon. These times, because it's the end times. Why is it the end times? Because if it was not the end times, this information would not be revealed yet. Because it is revealed, it's relevant. It's not relevant now because I'm not writing any books. I'm not going to leave any documents behind so they can find it thousands of years from now and say, oh, look, that guy on YouTube, he put this thing up there, and now we know. Now we know there's an Antichrist and it's going to be there. No, the information we need right here. Right here. And all of this is God saying, it's time to start getting ready for this stuff. And that's what I'm doing, and I'm preparing you guys for it. Israel will have his king. That king is going to conquer, but then he isn't going to stop there. It says he's going to turn his eyes to the sea. To the sea. Tell me, where in the Middle East is there a sea? The Red Sea. No. Can't be the Red Sea because you only got Egypt. It's just Egypt and then, the small towns all the way up to Israel. You got, Saudi Arabia. And they've got their militias, sure, but no really large and established countries. Then you've got the Gulf of Oman. That's a Gulf. That's way far over. And it's slanted. There isn't really a north and a south per se. There's Iran and Iraq, right? But why would it be them? Let me tell you, it's Israel. Israel is. Let's not get off guard. I am completely for Israel. I recognize the folly of Israel. I know where they went wrong. I know exactly how they went wrong. And I know exactly how they're going to go wrong again in the biggest way. This Antichrist, this king of Israel, is going to go to the Mediterranean because that's right next to Israel. And he's going to go to conquer these islands, the islands of the Mediterranean. He's going to be successful. But it says in Daniel He's going to turn his eyes to go back home, back to Israel, and he will fall and will not be found. This is the same king that's going to be around for a short time. So he's going to do all this very quickly, and he's going to do it very well. Military might is just, it's going to be impressive, let me tell you. This kind of conquest is going to be impressive. He's going to get out there, he's going to conquer everything he sets his eyes to. And then on his way back, he's going to fall into the Mediterranean, and they're not going to find him. Israel will mourn, right? Here's where the Antichrist, here's where the beast comes in. And this is where you, oh man, the world is not ready for this information. Let me tell you. The beast is the same beast, Leviathan, the one described in the Old Testament in the Garden of Eden. It's the same beast that tricked Eve into believing that she was not eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Tricked her into believing that she was eating from the tree of life to be like God. This beast is the devil, and he was cast down from heaven after the death of Jesus. We'll talk about that in another video. But listen, this beast was trapped into the Mediterranean so that he would not come out but for a time. He was thrown into hell because God didn't do that, because he had a plan to bring the maximum amount of people into heaven. He still wanted us to prosper, even though we had already betrayed him, accidentally or not, because Adam did not do it accidentally. He knew exactly where he was. He didn't have to be tricked. He just ate the fruit. Noble enough, because he didn't want to lose his love. Because Eve was the only thing that really brought him comfort. Even though he was walking in the garden with God, he did not find a better companion than Eve. God made it purposefully like that. So this guy's going to fall into the Mediterranean. Everyone's going to think he's dead. There's no way he can make it back to Israel alive. He fell. He's gone. And then he will arise. This is where we get into Revelation. This may seem like a bunch of prophetic hoo-ha, but these descriptions are very specific. The beast is the Antichrist. And it says he comes out of the sea with a head that is wounded. Look, this guy, he's going to come back out of the ocean, out of the Mediterranean Sea. And people are going to say, whoa, this guy is alive. He's not only the greatest king that lived, he's still alive. And the problem is, Jesus being the sixth king who is, they don't believe that Jesus was king. That makes the Antichrist that sixth king that they believe is immortal. When he comes back out of the Mediterranean Sea, he's going to come back with the beast. The dragon is going to come out of the water with him. And let me tell you, you want to know what I mean by dragon? This is not at all some sort of magical imagery to describe a man. It's a freaking dragon. Look in the chapter 33 of Job. 33 is where, I believe it's 33, is where God himself comes to Job and starts talking to him about things that are so far beyond his understanding. And one of the things he talks about is Leviathan, describing him with great detail. This dragon, scales, fire breathing, goes underwater, lives underwater. Coincidence? I think not. There's no water around Israel like Mediterranean. Lives underwater, makes the bottom to boil. In his path leaves light. Fire breathing underwater. No, we're talking Mario here, right? So this is a legitimate dragon. Moreover, this is the dragon from the beginning. He can talk, and he can give power. And he will give his power to the beast so that everyone worships him. And you have to take the mark of the Antichrist, this guy, this king of Israel. He's going to come back up with all this power from the beast. He's going to say, this dragon gave me this power. This is awesome. Worship it. And because no one in this world, not even myself, has seen a dragon for real, we've only heard stories. You know, the mythical stories of dragons, the ancient people, the the medieval peoples and their dragon fighting. You know, whether or not it happened, I don't know. But here's what they do know. Everyone knew such a thing as a dragon existed. That's it. That's all we know. And then when we actually see one come out of the water and it's fire breathing, and it's magnificent and beautiful, we're going to say, what the F? And people will worship it. Not because it's the greatest find ever, but because it can talk. And it has power and it has wisdom. And that's the problem. You get an ancient being that's smarter and knows way more about everything than you do. You're going to lose unless you already know the truth. That's why when you see it happen, because you've listened to me, and you see a dragon coming out of the Mediterranean, what? Screw it. When you see Israel with a king, you know exactly what to expect. And when you do see that dragon come out, you know the crap has hit the fan. It's time to go. Go where? I don't know. At that point, you just have to believe in Jesus and just hold deep onto the words of Daniel. Rip them out of your Bible. Bibles will be outlawed. Take the words with you. Memorize Daniel. Memorize Revelation. And just, I don't even know. I don't even know. But that's what's going to happen. The Antichrist is the next king of Israel. He reigns, he falls, he comes back with a vengeance, and then because Israel believes that he's the sixth king who is, they're going to convince him. No, the dragon, Satan, is going to convince him that he is God, and he'll believe it. He'll believe it. Why wouldn't he? He doesn't know anything about God. That's a problem. If it's a problem enough that you could be tricked into being the Antichrist, it's a problem for you to think that you're going to get into heaven and not know anything about God. He's going to come out and he's going to sit on the throne. That means, remember, the Muslims are already expelled out of Israel. And the Temple Mount is back. They haven't found the ark yet. It's in there. They don't know it because they're not going to read the word. Why would they read the word if this guy thinks he's God? They don't need Torah. Toss that crap out. You know? He's going to sit on the throne. He's going to sit on the throne. Maybe the mercy room. I don't know. I don't know where the throne is in the temple. Maybe he will have the ark there, you know? But he is going to sit on that throne and he's going to say, this guy is God. And the world will believe him. At the very least, the Jews will believe him. And he's going to make a peace treaty. That 7-year peace treaty everyone's heard about. But you didn't know the context till now. He's going to make that peace treaty after he's made himself as God. He's going to say, 7 years peace for the world. I've got the power to make the world at peace because I've got the dragon with me. Listen, here's how we're going to do it. Because I am God, right? Everyone worship me and the beast. Take my mark, worship the beast. You don't have the mark, you don't eat, nothing. You're not going to buy, not going to sell. We're going to make this world better. 7 years, I can do it. Halfway through that, in fact, I don't even know, man. I mean, there's plenty of it. But halfway through that 7-year peace treaty, he is going to turn around and destroy Israel for 42 months, 3.5 years. 3.5 years, half of the 7-year treaty. Even in Daniel, in the book of Daniel, it talks about it puts in 2,160 days, converted into years, 3.5. It's all over the place, guys. All this information is everywhere. But once again, the most important thing you need to understand, take away from this, the Antichrist will be the next king of Israel. The proof is in Daniel. There is no other king over Israel. It flatly lines out there's only 8 kings. No nation has had 8 kings. They had plenty more. Israel only had 5 kings in their entire history. 5 kings over their entire nation. And then they collapsed, and they're still around. They had another king, Jesus, who is the king, and they don't believe that he was the king. So their 6th king, they will believe, is the one who is immortal, and that will be the Antichrist, who is actually the 7th king and the 8th king. He'll be gone for a while because he'll fall into the Mediterranean after his conquest. He'll come back with the dragon. That's how it is. It's crazy, I know, but let me tell you again, you heard it. So when you see it happen, you can't say, oh, well, everyone believes that. This is a coincidence. It is no coincidence. Nobody believes the truth that the Antichrist will rise out of Israel. Israel, in fact, is the great whore of Babylon. And it's said throughout the Old Testament. God himself uses an analogy to describe Israel as a whore. He says Samaria, his sister, Israel's sister, hasn't committed half the lewd acts that they did. You know, there's a story. I'll just quick segue here. There's a story in the Old Testament, in Judges, the last of the Judges, and this guy, he was a priest. He went and did some work. He came back and he stayed in the town of Benjamin because he didn't want to stay anywhere else because they weren't Israelites. Anyways, he went in to this guy's house. Old guy. He let him in to stay. These people show up at the door and they say, we saw some men come in here with you. Bring them out. We're going to have sex with them. This is the same thing that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. And the guy had come looking for his wife. His wife, who was prostituting herself. After she was married, she went to these places and she was prostituting herself. He went to bring her back peaceably. He didn't want to kill her. He didn't want to throw her away or divorce her. This is my wife. I'm gonna bring her back. He just went to go get her. Anyway, these guys show up and they're like, listen, we're gonna have sex with you or we're gonna kill you. And he wouldn't have it. You know, and instead he sent out his wife. Why? Because she was already a prostitute. This is the work. This is the work of her hands. This is what she was already doing. And he wasn't going to defile himself because he was a priest of Israel. He sent her out. This is the life that she knows. So they had their way with her. Those 5 men. And in the process, they killed her. And the next morning he came out and she was there at the threshold of the door. And he says to her, come on, it's time to go. We need to go. And she didn't say anything. And he checked, she was dead. It doesn't say she was dead. People believe that she wasn't dead. But it says, if you read it carefully, it says she fell at the threshold and she wasn't alive anymore. She died right there because they abused her so badly. To the point where he came out, he didn't even know that she was dead. So he didn't shed a tear. It just says he took her, picked her up, put her on his camel. People would like to imagine that she just sat on the camel and just hopped along on the way home. No, he put her on the camel. He knows the feel of a dead body. Anyone would. You pick somebody up and they're dead. He knows she was dead. He went back home. He chopped her body up in 12 pieces and sent them to each of the tribes of Israel. People say, oh my God, that's ridiculous. Why would he do that? This is evil. That means God's evil. No, this guy did this. Why? Because it was the tribe of Benjamin. It was Israelites that did this thing to her. And nothing had been seen like that in Israel yet. That they would do this to the wife of a priest. The Israelites. We're not talking Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah pales in comparison to the sins of Israel, says God in the Old Testament. You don't even have to look at the New Testament, Jesus, whatever. It's in the Old Testament. They should know that. It's them. They are the whore of Babylon. And being such, the whore of Babylon sits on the dragon, 7 hills, right? We'll get into that in the next video. I don't want to keep you guys waiting. Thanks for watching. Keep in mind, the Antichrist, we know this thing. Just keep it with you, right? Talk to people about it, because I guarantee you have not heard this at all. Because this is new stuff. This is how God works, And we'll be back in the very next video. I'll just make it right after this. Why not? Keep talking. So, I'll make it right after this. And we'll continue talking with the, about the whore of Babylon and the dragon, the red dragon, which he sits on 7 heads. So thanks again for watching. This is Book signing out.